Contemporary Practice Sketchbook Transforming Materials. This sketchbook shows the development and process that I've gone through for the transforming of materials. Started off with some mind maps, and this led on to looking at materials that could possibly be transformed. At the beginning of the assignment, I looked at various materials that are transformed, as a textile practitioner we're continuously transforming materials, and as we can see, I'm building up some information and research within my own work. I decided to make the development of a plastic coffee top lid, where I deconstructed and reconstructed through heat and stitch to form a plastic fabric. This then gave me an idea to start to look at materials that I'd not necessarily worked with before, and I decided, because I'm a hairdresser, that I was going to pursue the material hair. Now, I researched in depth within this area, which was accessible through my own knowledge and various media and material, and discovered that hair can be transformed into a textile. Within this research, I looked at avant-garde hairdressers, Angelino Seminara, who looks at areas like moths, the spine, and one particular collection, sushi. I then looked at Nadia Noda, that looked and researched into making hair hats, and I also researched this year's British hairdresser of the year, Sally Brooks. Hair types that I started to research and change material of was horsehair, real hair and synthetic hair, and just pursued treating these materials as a textile. Synthetic hair you can heat with an iron, which I did in this case, and it fuses the hair together, and it can also be crocheted, woven. And then what I did, I pursued the area of translating the hair into things like crochet, considered weaving, and then transformed the material again with overlaying with things like varnish, paint, wax. And as we can see through here, real hair has been transformed in paint. I've actually allowed the hair to dictate the patterns. I did at one point consider what if hair didn't become sustainable, so I tried to use string to replicate hair using a method of PVA glue, which then led on to other areas of experimentation with the PVA in plastic trays. As we can see through here, I've made lots of photographic imagery and lots of notes. The note making then led on to developing the idea with synthetic hair, and I've transformed the material within a tray of PVA glue, allowing it to dry and it becoming a fabric. I found that this assignment started to become very scientific, and it was important to make lots of notes. As we can see, there is continuous documentation throughout the assignment with the various processes and techniques that I've taken on board. Lots of drawing, lots of note making. And experimentation. Furthering the investigations into research, I've then started to look at the flexibility and the durability of my heat fused synthetic hair. This worked really well, a little bit easier than actual real human hair, this allowed me to make the translation and practice my own hair hats with this material, pinning the hair freehand to the polystyrene block. Then I considered making a combination of the coffee top lid with little samples of hair. This became a flexible fabric, and then I just put these ideas into context with some photographs that could possibly become a printed textile. Further developments of the coffee top lip and hair. I translated these into hair hats, and as we can see, plenty of experimentation. Human hair, as in human hair on the head, you can actually weave the hair, so I played with this as an idea. This idea then started to bring back inspirations of Iris van Herpen that I used in my previous assignment. So I here replicated some of the images that she uses in her fabrics, and this worked really well. Kind of made more of a connection. Here these experiments were more of a three-dimensional, with a balloon, wrapping hair around in PVA glue and then popping the balloon. I personally don't like these experiments, but they did actually make good video footage of when the balloon was popped and it actually moves. And then I've made the translation into hair hats, and some of these images started to give more inspiration, as this one reminds me of costume design Elizabeth I. Progressing with real hair, I then went back to transforming them in a more of a traditional way, making them look like basket weave and trellis, making transformations into hair hats, and then further investigations into hair in context as a garment. This research went quite in depth, and there were some very interesting things that I started to discover. Then this led on to hair in the world of fashion. The master himself, Alexander McQueen, Vivienne Westwood, and then this imagery started to relate a lot more to my samples of Iris van Herpen. Again, we can see lots of note making, and we can see now further development of my samples and work. I then, during the assignment, started to draw with hair, just to see how hair dipped in paint and ink, drawing with it, how it would make and make texture, again allowing these materials to do their own thing. Halfway through the assignment, I went back to real hair using crochet and knots and transforming these materials with things like black matte paint, white emulsion and plaster of Paris. I liked the elements of the traditional materials. This then started to further my investigations with hair and started to look at mood boards and colour, because I hadn't worked with the colour palette as of yet. So through here we can see some further advances of colour. The colour palette did derive from what we call direct colour, or in the world of the commercial client, crazy colour. So I experimented here, and then this led on to working with imagery and playing around with just simple colour. And I did actually find some synthetic hair that replicated, and through here I decided to go with a weave technique, and this worked quite successfully with the colour palette of synthetic hair. To further the investigations on this as a sample, I considered it to be my refined sample and made a decision to go with this. I did put the sample into various contexts interiors and fashion. Haven't actually made anything as such because I do actually love this as a sample. I made 10 of these, so they became large scale. But the one thing that was really interesting about this, during this research, I felt that it had started to look like or resembled a Harris Tweed stroke tartan. Harris Tweed do weave tartan designs, only this one that I've replicated is made from hair. Further to the investigations on this, I came across a contemporary artist called Matthew Barney, who was a sculptor, filmmaker, and he actually, one of his mythological characters, had a woven tartan costume made that was red, blue and apricot in colour, which replicated veins and arteries and skin. So this has kind of now started me thinking about ideas of how could I replicate my colour palettes to make representations of a traditional tartan, which I think it would do through my research of tartan specific colours for specific areas and regions. Only this I considered as scientific. Harris Tweed tartan, because of it being made out of hair, could have connotations of DNA and identity.